y'all. I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we are bringing you another episode of our podcast. I'm moving to North Carolina. Now what? So we're trying to tackle some of the most important questions that you have, at least this past year in 2024. So one of the big ones is what happens after I've signed the contract? So between the contract signing and closing, what am I doing? What am I responsible for? And who's telling me to do this stuff? So the first one, what happens right after you sign? Well, you typically enter a period called escrow. Now, here in North Carolina, we have two different time periods in our contract. We have the due diligence period and the earnest period. So it's a little bit different because when you enter escrow, you're essentially having everything held in escrow, from money to documents. But in North Carolina, we do have an escrow agent that's typically going to be your closing attorney that will hold some funds, but not all funds. So I do want to kind of give you that little asterisk just because our great state is one of four that likes to do things a little different when it comes to due diligence. So what goes into an escrow account? Well, it can be funds like an earnest deposit would actually go in escrow, typically held in a non-interest bearing trust account with a closing attorney. You also have a lot of documents about the process of selling that are also held in escrow until you close on closing day. So what do you need to do before you close? Well, one of the big ones, and you've probably already started this process when you got pre-qualified for a mortgage, is getting approved in the mortgage process. So you've got a loan officer that's sending all these documents to somebody called an underwriter, and they're approving all of these things and telling you what paperwork is required or additional items that are also required. So all of these different pieces are going to kind of add up along the process, and you're going to enter different phases of the mortgage process. So just make sure you're in good standing with your lender. Always double check that they're not waiting on something to get the next step rolling, because you could actually elongate your time period if you're kind of delayed on the financial side of things. A couple things your lender may ask you about is a title search, which is typically done by a title company. Closing attorneys work very closely with title companies here. So we don't necessarily have the buyers going out and shopping around all of the time for their title company. It's just kind of right in line with the closing attorney's office, a little more streamlined here, if you will. But a title search is also going to verify who actually owns this home. So if the home has changed hands a lot over the course of time, it's really good that that deed history is all aligning and matching up. And they're also kind of looking for, do you have clear title? So like, are there any liens and outstanding stuff still remaining? Another thing that your lender may ask for is proof of homeowner's insurance. So keep in mind, this means that if there's anything catastrophic that happens to the home during the duration that you own it, it's protected with that insurance policy. So another big step and another common question throughout the process is, when does an appraisal happen? Who orders it? What is an appraisal? So a home appraisal is essentially a professional opinion done by a licensed appraiser, and they go through a very stringent certification process. That licensed appraiser is going to give a valuation on the home. So your appraiser is a third-party entity that works alongside the lender and alongside you, but there's not a ton of communication other than the report that they issue. They're going to pull comparable properties to then give the subject property, which is the one you're buying, a value. You do want to make sure that the value of the home is in line with the agreed upon purchase price. One of the biggest issues that we saw during the COVID market, when things kind of started closing very quickly and going under contract, rapid fire, and we just saw such a big transaction number kind of increase, it was really hard for appraisers to keep up with that, just because appraisals are based on what has happened, meaning closed properties. So a lot of times as the market was just kind of rapidly increasing and people were going so substantially over the list price to get to their purchase price, it made that appraisal process very dicey. So in some instances, in some locations, you might still see things like an appraisal addendum where you're kind of having to agree of what happens if the home doesn't appraise. Certain loan products also have this, like with FHA loans and VA loans. So talk to your agent about any of that piece of the process. Another stage is your inspections. So, do you need a home inspection? We in North Carolina would highly recommend getting that because we are an as is purchase state. There is another video that we've done that is strictly on just home inspections and understanding that piece of the process. So, make sure that you're tackling that as well to give you a little bit more in depth info. But no, home inspections are not required. They're definitely suggested because it prevents you from having to deal with very costly problems that you may not learn about until after you move in. That means the home is yours and it's financially your responsibility. Another big question is, how long does this process take, and like when can I even move in? Well, until the home is officially yours, meaning the deed is recorded, the keys have been given to you, the home is not yours. You are not allowed to change or make any type of improvements to the property until after closing day. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're planning all these projects and stuff in your head, scheduling vendors and doing things like that. Until the home has closed, it is not yours. So that process length, typically here in North Carolina, especially in the Triangle, we're seeing around 30 days, give or take. There are certain levels of homes that take a little bit longer. For example, things that are in the multi-million dollar range might take longer than 30 days, depending on how you're financing it. There are other loan products sometimes that do take a little bit longer. If they're government backed, for example, they might have a longer window just because the appraisal process takes longer. So just know 30 days is kind of give or take from start to finish. So what happens at closing? So you've made it through all of these stages and it's finally getting close to closing day. Well, one of the big things that happens prior to closing is doing that final walkthrough. You want to make sure everything in the house is still the same. But at the closing table, you're going to sign a lot of documents, and you're typically going to sign it in triplicate. So one for you, one for the seller, and then one to be recorded. You're also going to potentially get access to your keys on closing day. Keep in mind, the keys cannot be in your possession until the home is yours. So in some states, you might have had the opportunity to, at the closing table, you exchange the keys. We don't do that here. Until the home is recorded in your name, you are not allowed to have those as the buyer. Another thing that this whole exchange idea that you see in some states that's different here, for financial reasons, we actually don't put the buyer and seller at the same closing table anymore. Typically, the seller actually signs all their stuff in advance. And then one of the biggest things is bringing your cash to closing. Now, keep in mind, we don't literally mean coming in with bags or suitcases of actual cash. A lot of times they use a wiring process, but that is also something you'll be required to bring to the table. Hopefully this has been helpful in answering some of those top questions. And what are the steps in the process from when you go under contract to when you close on your new home? I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we'll see you next time.